Advancing Justice, Empowering Autonomy and Rebuilding a New Syria, run by the Centre for Kurdish Progress. My name is Hassan, I'm the Member of Parliament for Crawley, and I'm here in my capacity as the Vice Chairman of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for the Kurds. We have a fantastic panel here with you today, and I'll go through them very quickly. We have Mr. Hassan Mohammed, he's the Head of Public Relations Office, Syrian Democratic Council. Norm Glassman will be attending later, who people of course know as a leading Labour intellectual, member of the House of Lords and founder of the Blue Labour movement. Simon Dubbins, to my left, is the Director of International for the United Union since 2007, with over 3 decades of experience in the European and international trade union movement. And last but by no means least, my parliamentary colleague and friend, Bambos Charalambous. So if I can kick off without further ado, I'm introducing Mr. Hassan Mohammed to speak with us about the current situation in Syria.
مساء الخير للجميع. سيدات وسادة الحضور الكريم، اسمحوا لي بداية أن أعبر عن شكري وامتناني لهذه الدعوة الكريمة ولإتاحة الفرصة لي لأخاطبكم حول قضية في غاية الأهمية، وهي مستقبل سوريا ودور بريطانيا في عملية السلام والاستقرار.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the time to address you and to update you on the latest that's happening in the Middle East in general and in northeast Syria.
سوريا اليوم تعيش في مرحلة دقيقة للغاية بعد أكثر من عقد من الحرب والصراع، والتضحيات كانت جسيمة. ملايين المهجرين، مئات الآلاف من الضحايا، بنية تحتية شبه مدمرة، ومع ذلك ورغم الألم فإن إرادة الحياة لدى السوريين ما زالت أقوى من كل ما مر به.
The harsh reality is Syria is going through very difficult times, a transition time. Hundreds of people lost their lives, and the totally ruined infrastructure in the country, and we are trying to find a way to settle the differences to bring peace process.
وبعد سقوط النظام البائد استبشرنا خيرا، ولكن السلوك النظام الذي اتبع من قبل الحكومة الانتقالية والمجازر التي ارتكبت، وخاصة في الساحل والجنوب في السويداء، والتعديات على المكون المسيحي وما رأيناه في دمشق في تفجير الكنيسة، أكد لنا مرة أخرى أن المركزية المطلقة تنتج الاستبداد، والاستبداد يقود دائما إلى الكوارث والخراب.
We have, as Syrians, we have suffered a lot under the dictatorship of the Assad regime, and we were hoping to see a big difference when the old regime was toppled. But what comes out after that was even worse, where we lost Christians, the bombing of a church, and the rest of the harsh incidents happened recently proved that nothing has really changed on the ground.
ولكن هناك أمل. في شمال وشرق سوريا ولد نموذج الإدارة الذاتية حيث الديمقراطية والتشاركية والمساواة. تجربة صعبة، لكن أثبتت أن الديمقراطية ممكنة، والمساواة بين الرجل والمرأة ممكنة، وأن التشاركية بين جميع المكونات ممكنة، وأن اللامركزية ممكنة.
I missed this part. The central government from the previous, the centralized government in Syria is a very bad example. Despite all the bad things happening, we have proven in northeast Syria that we have a track record of having a democratic administration in there, which reflects on our deep belief in respecting women and other minorities' rights, and this could be replicated in the rest of the country.
واليوم مع اتفاقية 10 آذار بين السيد أحمد شرع رئيس الحكومة الانتقالية والقائد مظلوم عبدي، فتح الباب أمام دمج تأسيسي تدريجي بين الإدارة الذاتية والحكومة الانتقالية في دمشق.
There was a meeting in March this year between General Muslim Abdi the transition leader of Syria, Mohammed, which could lay the foundation for a proper transition in Syria towards democracy.
هذا الاتفاق يمكن أن يؤسس لدولة جديدة تقوم على اللامركزية وبرلمان بغرفتين فلا يعود طرف واحد محتكر للسلطة.
This agreement between the Northeast Syria and the central government, transitional central government, lays the foundation for having decentralized government, no matter under what title. We cannot have central government in Syria because Syrians have suffered a lot, and there is a big hope in implementing that agreement.
أيها الأصدقاء، الحوار هو الطريق الوحيد. فشل الحوار يعني فوضى ثانية، حرب أهلية جديدة، وربما موجة هجرة ثانية جديدة أكبر من الأولى. لا السوريون يريدون ذلك، ولا أنتم في أوروبا وبريطانيا تستطيعون تحمله.
Dear friends, negotiations and dialogue is the key in bringing all the conflicting parties together. Syrians have suffered a lot, and we have hundreds of thousands and millions of Syrians are displaced. The only way is to bring people together to have a proper dialogue and negotiation, and with that we need help.
لذلك إنجاح المفاوضات ليس شأنا سوريا فقط، بل مسؤولية دولية.
Therefore, having a proper dialogue and a successful negotiation is not just the responsibility of Syrians, but it is an international problem that we need help from everyone.
وهنا دور بريطانيا التي تستطيع أن تكون شريكا وضامنا أن تستخدم نفوذها السياسي والدبلوماسي لتأمين الغطاء الدولي للاتفاق، وأن تمنح السوريين الثقة بأن المجتمع الدولي يقف معه وتدفع العملية السياسية إلى الأمام.
There it comes the British role in using its position and diplomatic and all its power in the Middle East, in the region, to make sure there will be a proper dialogue and negotiation to bring peace in this country, because we don't want another war, we don't want a civil war, we have suffered enough. We need your help, we need Britain's help to reach safety.
وقوفكم معنا ليس دعما لسوريا فقط، بل هو استثمار في الاستقرار الإقليمي وفي أمن العالم.
You being with us, your support for this peace process in Syria is not just, you are not just supporting Syria. You will be making sure to bring peace for the entire region, for the infrastructure rebuilding in the country and in the region.
أصدقائي، إذا نجحت المفاوضات سيتحقق في سوريا الاستقرار، ومع الاستقرار تبدأ إعادة الإعمار والاستثمار وبناء السلام والاستقرار.
Dear friends, if the negotiations and the dialogue between the central government and Northeast Syria was successful, this will bring peace, prosperity, and the rebuilding of the country, and laying the foundations for long-term peace in the entire Middle East.
هذا الاستثمار ليس مجرد استثمار اقتصادي، بل استثمار في عودة الملايين السوريين إلى بيوتهم من المهجر.
This will bring investment, international investment, and security, and along with that, it will bring the return of millions of Syrians who left their country, displaced internally and internationally. And this will open the gate to ease the problems in Syria and Europe and elsewhere.
السيدات والسادة، أمامنا خيارين. أولا الفوضى، ثانيا سوريا جديدة، سوريا ديمقراطية تعددية لا مركزية تشاركية.
Dear friends, we only have two options. We have chaos or democracy or stability in Syria. Democratic Syria.
نحن اخترنا هذا الطريق الثاني، ونؤمن أن بريطانيا يمكن أن تكون شريكا أساسيا في هذا المستقبل، وشكرا لكم.
We have chosen the second path, which is a path of dialogue and negotiation, and with that we need UK's influence and pressure the government to bring peace to the country and the Middle East. And thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll now call on each of our other panellists to respond. I'll start by.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you very much for inviting me to be on this panel. I think we need to just look at what's happened, the situation as it is now. About 2 years ago, the Arab League were willing to welcome Assad's Syria back into the fold with the Arab League. Things have changed so quickly in that time. Few could have foreseen the fall of Assad so quickly, barely a year ago. So things have happened really quickly. I think we also need to look at the economy. The economy in Syria is in a very dire situation. There are huge problems with the economy. The Syrian pound lost 99% of its value in the last 10 years. The average salary for an individual is $30 US per month, but the actual cost of living is $350 a month in Syria. 90% of Syrians live under the poverty line, and 70% of Syrians are dependent on humanitarian aid. So that just sets the framework, and that's what the challenges that are being faced. The lifting of sanctions, so it was quite a big deal when President Trump met with Ahmed al-Shara at the UN recently, and when the sanctions were lifted, with the support of many of the Arab nations, primarily driven by Turkey, but also with the support of many European nations. And just want to get into the reason behind that. One of the issues has been touched upon. There are a large number of Syrian refugees in neighbouring countries. There are over 2 million in Jordan. There was 1 million in Lebanon, 5 million in Turkey, and also some have gone further afield to European countries. Some are returning back now with the fall of Assad, and the West see that the prospects for investment in a rebuilt Syria, primarily coming from the Arab nations, and also in part from Turkey, which also seems to be influential in this as well. And in addition, countries like Saudi Arabia and Jordan, they were suffering from the import of drugs, so things like Captagon, that were going through the border and having a really bad impact in Saudi Arabia and in Jordan. Captagon is a manufactured drug, it's a synthetic drug, and Syria had, in essence, because of the sanctions placed upon it, become a narco state. So that just sets the framework as to where things are. However, that has a really bad, there are also consequences for the SDF. So the SDF managed the 2 IDP camps in the north of Syria. They detained the Islamic State fighters there. So they hold about 40,000 women and children in those camps. And there are 20 plus prisons holding about 9,500 former ISIS fighters as well. And we need to remember that the SDF were our allies in fighting ISIS, and we need to make sure that they're not forgotten in this. So yeah, absolutely we need to support them in these negotiations to make sure that democracy does prevail. There is democracy for them. Now the sanctions were lifted without conditions. But there is still an expectation on the Syrian temporary government to make sure that certain things are in place. One of those things is about the protection of minorities, particularly the Alawites, but also the Druze, and obviously the Kurdish concern as well. So those are big issues. Some of the ISIS are still around, haven't gone away, they're regrouping. They don't want to see the temporary government succeed. They see the temporary government as an apostate government. And they also have scores to settle as well. So these are some of the challenges that we face. Also, there are a number of different ethnic groups that still have issues with other minorities. So I think we can't just assume that the attacks on the Alawites and the Druze and the other minorities are coming from one or two actors. There's a long history of disputes with minorities over the 50 years of the Assad regime. And so there will be a long time for that resolution, for that to be resolved. And I think one of the things we also need to be asking is for that conflict resolution. We need to have like something like a truth and reconciliation. There are mass graves in Syria for people who are opponents of Assad. There have been attacks on minorities, and that's also something that we need to reflect upon. But the priority for the West is they see a functioning, secure Syria as absolutely vital for the stability of the Middle East. And that's why they're prepared to put the investment in and be supportive. They're taking a risk with Bashar, so they haven't forgotten his past, but they think there is a prospect there for stability, but we must make sure that it's not a blank check, that we do put the pressure on as the West. We do remember who our friends are, and we see that security and stability for our friends in the region. I'll leave it there, and I know there'll be questions at the end, and I know that we have other speakers who want to speak as well, so I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. And last but no means least, Simon Dubbins from Kurds.
Thank you, Peter. Let me just say thanks to the organisers of the event, Ibrahim and the others. I really think it's important that this happens and is on the agenda here at Labour Party Conference. And as always, it's a pleasure to share a platform with the likes of yourself, Peter, and Bambos. And it was a privilege to see Hassan again. I had the privilege to meet you in Rojavash at the time some years ago. I was asked, colleagues, to just say a few words from a union perspective as to why what is happening in Syria is important and why we built, we took delegations and got involved with it. I think it's fair to say unions have got a long history of solidarity with the Kurdish movement. We've always recognised that the Kurdish movement shares our values and our aims about tolerance, diversity, inclusiveness, peace and women's rights and so on. But the real turning point was obviously Kobani in 2014, when I think the world looked on with horror at what was happening, but was also hugely inspired by the Kurdish-led resistance to ISIS, and effectively the battle was won and turned the tide in the war against ISIS. And it was quite stunning in that region and at that time to see that many of the combatants were actually women in that battle as well. So the union stepped up our solidarity work with the Kurdish movement and the Kurdish-led movement in the northeastern part of Syria. And as part of that, we started taking delegations. We actually went to Diyarbakir in Turkey in 2015, at the time when the Sur district was under real heavy attack, and it was quite clear that the Syrian civil war was almost spilling over into Turkey. And then shortly after, I think it was 2017, we took a cross-party delegation to first into northern Iraq and then crossed into Rojava, and we took another cross-party delegation in 2019. Speaking as a 30-year member of the Labour Party and trade unionist, it's not the easiest thing in the world going on a cross-party delegation, but what we really wanted to do was bring to as wide an audience as possible what was actually going on and what was happening. And I have to say, after seeing it firsthand, it was quite stunning that out of the chaos, the murder, the terrible situation that ISIS had created, it was really astonishing to see a grassroots democracy being built in northeastern Syria. It was built from the bottom up, local elected authorities, local councils, regional councils being elected, and then that plugging into an administration that covered the whole of the autonomous area. We saw firsthand that all religions and all ethnicities were included within the structures of those local and regional councils. We were stunned, to be quite honest, about the co-chair system, that women are institutionally co-chairs of every structure. That was more advanced, frankly, than where many Western countries are. All of that said, I wouldn't wish to say it was perfect and there was no faults or difficulties whatsoever. Obviously, they were coming out of a war-torn area. What was very interesting, though, in some of the more conservative areas where the women's agenda was being pursued, I thought the administration were dealing with it extremely sensitively, very carefully, and trying to make sure that there was a buy-in and that people were on board with it. But considering the starting point, it was a truly stunning achievement how much peace, stability and inclusiveness and rebuilding had gone on. Kobani was astonishing. The actual physical rebuilding of the infrastructure under such difficult conditions was quite extraordinary. Bambos quite rightly mentioned, which doesn't get enough attention, the pressure the Northeast administration has been under to try and hold secure former ISIS fighters, and to deal with that, and quite frankly, with very, very little assistance from Western countries, not even repatriating some of the fighters from their own countries that went there. So I take my hat off to Hassan and all of the colleagues from that region for what they did, what they've achieved. And you're quite right, Bambos, to remind people that they are our friends, are our allies, and we should under no circumstances abandon or desert them. I want to just finish, Chair, my intervention with really emphasising both visits, and obviously you see it from outside as well, but the threat of Turkey was ever present. When we were near the border zones, we were told to be very careful because there was sniping still going on. There's constant bombing been going on. Some of the bombing deliberately targets the ISIS camps with a view to try and release some of the ISIS fighters. Just after we were there in 2019 was when Turkey attacked and took the whole swathe of territory in northeastern Syria, and it was frankly astonishing that a NATO member state is more concerned with trying to support former jihadis and former ISIS fighters than trying to help support and develop an autonomous democratic administration that existed and had been built there. That pressure has never relented. Turkey took Afrin and ethnically cleansed a great part of it. We have a situation now where, after the collapse of Assad's regime, the HTS are in power. I don't think any of us are under any illusions about their history and where things are at. But okay, I've seen a real willingness from our Kurdish-led colleagues in the northeastern region to try and engage, as Hassan said, to try and draw up a new constitution. But the real issue is this: if we end up with a centralised state under the type of regime that the HTS appears to want, it's going to be quite devastating for the liberties and some of the freedoms that people in the northeast of Syria have won over that period. One issue that stuck very clearly in my mind during discussions that I was party to, somebody who was facilitating some of the talks in the background said to colleagues from the northeast area, well, why don't you make a move? Why don't you try and integrate your forces of the SDF with the HTS forces and build a Syrian unified army? And a colleague, a female colleague, said, it's all very well for you to say that, but 50% of the SDF forces are women. And we're dealing on the other side with HTS forces who are former jihadis. Now, how is that going to work and how is it practical? I think to touch on some of the ethnic tensions as well that you mentioned, Bambos and Hassan, the reality is a lot of the threatened minorities, the Alawites, the Druze and others, and obviously women, liberal women in the more western parts of Syria, look to the northeastern administration as a source of support and a source of energy and power for a more democratic, more open Syria. So it's absolutely essential that we do not take our eye off the ball. Clearly Erdogan is talking to Trump and wanting to get the green light for other things. And it's more important than ever that we redouble our support for the Northeast administration, that we redouble our efforts internationally to put pressure on to make sure Turkey doesn't attack, to make sure that there is a proper negotiated settlement and solution. And of course you are quite right to point out, Hassan, that this is important not just for the peoples of Syria, but actually it could be potentially a beacon for the rest of the region. And we should not forget the important contribution that all of you have made. So I hope that we can stand shoulder to shoulder with them and make sure that we move forward together, and they should never be abandoned. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. We now have time for questions. So if people could raise their hands. The AANES and prevent further military incursions from regional actors.
اوكي شكرا. الآن بيننا وبين الحكومة الانتقالية في دمشق بعض نقاط خلاف.
We have got some points that we disagree with major points with the transitional government in Damascus.
الخلاف هو كيفية تطبيق اتفاقية 10 آذار.
The main difference is how to implement what we've agreed on 10th of March this year.
ودمج قوات سوريا الديمقراطية في الجيش السوري.
How to mix or amalgamate the IS northeastern Syria's forces with the new forces that you have mentioned.
النقطة الأولى الخلاف هو هم يريدون، نحن اتفقنا في الشام معهم أن قوات سوريا الديمقراطية كفيلة يمكن أن ينضم إلى الجيش السوري وتبقى في منطقة الإدارة الذاتية.
In March's agreement, we have agreed, my understanding, we've agreed that our regiment in northeast Syria will stay as one force to protect entire Syria.
النقطة الثانية مسألة طبيعة النظام السوري، هم يركزون على المركزية ونحن نقول اللامركزية لا تعني التقسيم، بل تعني فعالية رؤية جميع المكونات بأنهم شركاء هذا الوطن.
And the other difference is we think Syria cannot be run through a centralized government. We need to decentralize this and to include all minorities in the country.
الآن هم يماطلون في تطبيق الاتفاقية ونحن نضغط مع الجهات الدولية من أجل ترجمة وتطبيق الاتفاقية.
The transitional government in Syria playing with time they are not implementing what we have agreed on. Well, we emphasize on implementing every single point of the agreement.
كان في موعدين في اللقاء في باريس، لكن هم أظهروا الحجج من أجل عدم عقد هذه اللقاءات في باريس.
We have had 2 appointments to meet up again in Paris with them, but they have found excuses not to go there to meet.
لكن رغم هذا عقدنا اللقاءين وليس على شكل مفاوضات. إلهام أحمد مع أسعد الشيبان لقاءين في دمشق من أجل استمرارية مسار التفاوض.
Despite that, we have sent Ilham Ahmed to Damascus to meet with the Asad al-Shaybani to continue twice. She went to meet up with him because they didn't go to Paris.
في الآونة الأخيرة أردنا تكثيف اللقاءات في حلب من أجل تطبيق اتفاقية 1 نيسان.
Recently, we've did lots of meetings in Aleppo to implement the March agreement.
لكن الوضع الآن بشكل عام بسوريا بعد المجازر في الساحل وفي سويدا، هناك توجه سوري بشكل عام من الإسلام المعتدل ومن القوى الوطنية السورية باتجاه شمال شرق سوريا بأن هؤلاء هم يكونون المنقذين.
There is a new opinion change in Syria after the massacres happened for the Druze and the Alawites. Most of moderate Muslims and nationals who are patriotic Syrians, they see us from North and East Syria as a beacon of hope. We could become saviors for the entire country.
ولكن تركيا تضغط على الحكومة من أجل عدم الوصول إلى الحل. نحن نحاول أن نستثمر إمكانياتنا هذا من أجل خلق حالة الاستقرار في سوريا.
Turkey is playing a negative role in here. Turkey is pushing its allies and friends not to implement this, and Turkey sees its interest in not to have a peace in this region, in the country.
لكن نقطة أخيرة، الدمج، نحن ننظر إلى الدمج أن يكون الدمج تدريجي تأسيسي ديمقراطي تشاركي.
We think after all what we have been through, we think the best way to mix and amalgamate forces and administration, it needs to be gradual. It takes time over stages. This is the only way.
هم حكومة أمر واقع ونحن أمر واقع، لذلك يتطلب دمج تأسيسي من جديد نؤسس سوريا.
They are a de facto government, we are a de facto government. Therefore, we need to establish all the infrastructure, all the administrations from scratch, from the bottom up.
طرحنا كبادرة حسن نية الآن نقولها أمامكم. يمكن أن نشكل غرفة عمليات مشتركة من الجانب العسكري ومن الجانب الأمني وحتى من الجانب الإداري بأن نعمل على بناء نموذج جديد في سوريا.
To show a positive signal to everyone, we have suggested, and I declare it here again, we are ready to have an operational theater to talk about everything from bottom up, to have professional people, officers, civil servants working on the ground to talk about all aspects of differences to start rebuilding the country again.
لا نريد أن نستغل الظروف، نريد أن نبني سوريا جديدة ونؤسس سوريا جديدة معا وبتشاركية وليس بالدمج القسري.
We don't want to have anything be forced upon us, whereas we want to see something done willingly. We are participating, we are seen as equal partners and building the infrastructure in the country together.
And they still have a very important role to play, particularly in relation to the prisoners that they hold. There will be a time when those prisoners are no longer under SDF governance. There will have to be a transition with after the transitionary government has concluded, there will have to be a handover at some stage. So I think the SDF can use this as leverage on the transitional government, and they can use it to bargain to get a better deal for them. So there are things that can be done. However, the West have abandoned or did abandon the SDF, and they need to step up and give them the support they need. So we need to make sure that that questions are asked in Parliament, that pressure is put on the FCDO, and not just in the UK, it has to be done internationally. And that we make sure that this is top of the agenda, because sanctions were lifted without any conditions. And as I mentioned, there is still an expectation. And as people have mentioned, Rojava is one wonderful example as to what can happen when the kingdoms are allowed to flourish in northeast Syria and they have their own governments. And so that needs to be held up as an example, and the fact that we don't want to lose that is really important. So putting pressure on the FCDO, but also within Syria using the bargaining chips that are available to the SDF is also important.
So that's
Yeah, if I could. Look, I mean, I would fully agree with what you just said there, but I think from the point of view of the UK government, Labour government, what they can concretely do is really make it clear to the Turkish government, to Erdogan, that it is unacceptable to keep attacking or threatening to attack the SDF forces in northeast Syria. Turkish state has always, Erdogan and the AK Party and the rest of them have always lied and smeared and accused the colleagues in northeast Syria of being terrorists, of attacking Turkey, and it's absolute nonsense. The reality has been all in the other direction. Erdogan has got an interest in getting rid of the northeast Syrian administration and trying to get it under the control of the new HTS administration. So we need to make that clear there, and we also need to make it clear to Trump and Washington, because they are a major player in this, in the whole region. They've got the forces still on the ground. Last time, as a result of a phone call between Erdogan and Trump, Erdogan got the green light to seize territory. If Trump gives him that again and there isn't resistance, then we're looking at a very dangerous situation. The other thing that I think people need to remember is HTS, I don't believe, are strong enough. It's my understanding, Hassan, correct me if I'm wrong, they are very fragmented. There are lots of small groups within the HTS, different jihadi groups that were all camped in Idlib until they took power. I don't believe they have the strength to defeat the SDF on their own. They will only be able to do it with Turkey. Now that's why the issue of what the UK government and other international institutions say for Turkey is really important now. There are many more authoritarian regimes in that region that would like to kill what's emerging in northeast Syria, and that's why it's more important than ever that we protect what has been built there for its inclusiveness, its equality, its tolerance, its democracy. It is the beacon for going forward. So, yeah, as I said before, it's absolutely essential that we don't take our eye off the ball. There is a brilliant example for the rest of the region there, but you simply cannot separate what's happening there from the wider convulsions that are going on in the area. We need to protect the democratic part of Syria, and we also need to put pressure on Turkey to continue to engage in some of the loose process of speaking to Erdogan, speaking to the Kurdish movement, and try and bring about a more democratic Turkey as well as part of that wider picture.
And so just quickly on that, Turkey's obviously looking to buy arms. They're looking at sort of buying military aircraft from the US. So I think looking at applying pressure, having some conditions on what those aircraft can be used for might be another way forward.
Let me just see if there's any other questions. We are running out of time. Okay.
James and along with my colleague Daniel, we're from an organisation called Reprieve, which work with a number of very serious human rights cases around the world. In particular, we have represent a few clients in northeast Syria, British nationals who are currently detained. My question for Hassan is, as you know, there's a small number of British nationals who are currently detained. I know that many of them feel that they've been let down by the British government and they've failed to be repatriated. Many are victims of trafficking and serious abuses by ISIS. They're mostly women and children. I know that the Kurdish government has repeatedly called on the UK to repatriate these nationals. My question to you, and I guess the rest of the panel, is what steps would you like to see the UK government take to ensure that that burden is taken away from the Kurds so that they can focus on protecting themselves and also to repatriate those nationals?
I'll start with Bambos to allow time for translation.
Yeah, so the question from Reprieve, the UK should do what other countries have done and should repatriate its nationals. They are UK nationals, other countries have done this, the US have done it, many European countries have done this. If there are nationals from another country in those camps, they should be repatriated and should face justice in their home countries. And there shouldn't be any debate about that. And that's what should happen. It's clear and simple. So that's what I believe should happen. On the issue about cuts to international aid, I think that has affected that there have been huge cuts to international aid, not just in the UK, but internationally. As I mentioned earlier, 7% of Syrians are dependent on humanitarian aid. But not only that, I think the UN are struggling to provide that aid. So I think that's also a problem that we're facing. And that's why the lifting of the economic sanctions was important to happen as quickly as possible, because with the investment that would come in, this is the theory behind it, investment would come in, and the lifting of sanctions, for example, about banking, so making bank transfers from Syria, that was a huge problem. So now that's lifted, that would allow more money to come in, and that would hopefully lift the economy and improve things. But you're right, it's not, has caused incredible hardship, and we need to do more to make sure that aid does get in, and there is the support needed for the people who are struggling in Syria.
Great. Hassan?
شكرا للسؤال. هلا بصدد الحكومة البريطانية في ماذا يمكن أن يعمل الحكومة البريطانية تجاه شمال وشرق سوريا وتجاه المواطنين. أولا أنا أتفق مع الأخ هنا أن يتبعوا خطوات بأن يأخذوا المواطنين إلى بلادهم أو يدعموا قوات سوريا الديمقراطية من أجل المحافظة على المخيمات والسجون.
Thank you for the question. And I think I agree with my colleague here that the British government should do what other countries done, either take those who are in the camps or work with us to guard where they are staying, but they are not doing that.
لكن النقطة الأهم المطلوبة من الحكومة البريطانية أن تضغط من الجانب السياسي ومن الجانب الدبلوماسي من أجل استمرارية المفاوضات والوصول إلى الحل، وعندما نصل إلى الحل سيحل جميع المشاكل الموجودة في سوريا ويحدث الاستقرار ويصبح الشعب المواطنين في حالة من البناء والاستقرار.
But we think the most important thing the British government could do is to help and use its influence to help us to succeed in our negotiation, putting pressure in the transitional government in Syria to bring us closer to each other, because by solving our differences and forming a new government, the rest of the problems will gradually fade away and all be resolved.
والنقطة الأخرى، ما زالت داعش موجودة في المنطقة ويتم إدارة المنطقة بالتمشيطات، لذلك عند إضعاف الدعم لقوات سوريا الديمقراطية يمكن أن يحدث فوضى ثانية، ونحن هذا نتخوف من أن تحصل فوضى ثانية في المنطقة وينتشر داعش مرة أخرى ويتم قيامه.
The reality is ISIS is still on the ground and they are actively doing things here and there. And our forces and other forces are fighting them from different locations. So this is a big threat. Things could shift dramatically and we could end up having another civil war in Syria.
خاصة في مناطق سيطرة الحكومة الانتقالية في دير الزور في البادية لا تستطيع ضبط المنطقة وتتحرك داعش بحرية وتقوم بهجمات من تلك المنطقة إلى مناطق أخرى. لذلك هناك مخاطر جدية كثيرة.
ISIS stronghold at the moment is Deir ez-Zor and the Badia, and they are moving freely, operating freely in these areas, and they are this has become the starting point of attacking other locations from them. This is very serious, and the British government should use its influence to help us to fight them and stop them.
لذلك هناك ضرورة لبقاء قوات سوريا الديمقراطية ودعم قوات سوريا الديمقراطية لحين ظهور دستور سوريا وخروج مرحلة الانتخابات.
Therefore, supporting North Syrian administration is essential to fighting ISIS and bringing peace into the region, in Syria and into the region. Therefore, we need the government support to be committed continuously to help us to protect the country.
Okay. The chap on the end there, if it's incredibly brief, we've got 2 minutes left and we're going to leave the room.
Don't worry, I'll be very, very quickly. I'm just asking the panel as a whole, what SDF or the Kurds in Rojava should do instead of sitting there just waiting for the central government to respond. They are relying on the central government to do something. Instead, what they should do in order to move that those actions.
I think we've got it. Can I ask for a one-sentence answer to that, if possible? I'll start with you, Simon, if that's...
I don't think it's in the hands of the SDF. They've made it very clear they want to negotiate, they want to integrate, they want to do it in the right way. They are speaking to international colleagues, trying to build international pressure. It's really HTS with Turkey behind it that are the problem in this.
Okay, great.
The interest to make sure there is a stable Syria. Now, if there isn't a stable Syria, if that's then that's going to cause huge problems. So putting pressure on international governments to make sure that that they speak up and they support functioning northeast Syrian democracy is the best way of going about it.
And Mr. Ali.
يعني النقطة الأساسية يعني من أجل عدم الانزلاق في الفوضى الثانية إذا تم الضغط من قبل بريطانيا والدول الأوروبية الأخرى يمكن أن يضعفوا تدخل التركي في المنطقة بالإضافة إلى الضغط على الحكومة الانتقالية من أجل التقدم في مسار المفاوضات. نحن لنا ثقة وإيمان بتأثير الدول الأوروبية وبريطانيا بدعم الانتقالية.
To make sure we are not dragged on to the first point to having another case in Syria, we have a strong belief that Britain could play a vital role in using its diplomacy to put pressure on Turkey, not to stop putting pressure on northern Syria and attacking them, and stop supporting the hardliners in Syria. This is the only way. This is the only way to make sure the new government in Syria succeeds.
I'm afraid we're out of time. Do come over and have a conversation with panelists afterwards. Thank you very much for coming. I hope it's been enlightening, but people do try and get involved with the Centre for Kurdish Progress, please, and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.